And then in terms of Newcastle, there was pictures that emerged of Yasser Al-Rumayyan next to Donald Trump at a UFC event. Could that relationship have any impact on Newcastle? Any potential positives of them or Trump having better links with Saudi, essentially?
I doubt direct links, but I mean, you know, it shows a direction of travel, which is that Saudi Arabia, both politically and in the sporting sense, because we know clearly they're involved in golf as well. You know, directionally, I think sport is going to continue to be a centerpiece of their presentation to the outside world. And, you know, you've got a signal there as to who the key players are within that, within Saudi and within sport, and therefore, you know, that Newcastle are at the fore of it. And I think, contrary to some of the noises that were coming out, that there's a kind of reduction of the level of investment and time and focus that Saudi are putting on certain sporting assets, potentially the domestic league more than anything. I think you're going to see that being a very important part, you know, for exactly the reasons that we saw, you know, Trump there. You know, if you've got major sporting events where you can get time sat beside presidents in a social environment, building relationships, then of course there's value to that. So you don't have to own the sporting event to get that, but it definitely helps. So I wouldn't say there's any direct impact on Newcastle, but you know, they're clearly owned by important players with important that are going to be important over the next few years, even more so under a Trump administration. So yeah, I think the bigger issue for that we've got in relation to Trump is going to be around what happens to inflation and interest rates, global interest rates. That is going to be the big issue for all of football, not just Newcastle, and it will affect Newcastle in terms of building stadia, if that's what they do, or developing the stadia. But it's going to affect every club if interest rates are higher for longer due to the impact of a Trump administration. But that's an economic aspect as opposed to a directly political aspect in relation to Saudi.
In terms of the new stadium, Newcastle CEO Brad Miller said the club could double their revenue if they were to build a new stadium. How likely do you think that is? That's quite a significant amount of money.
Yeah, it's not quite right, that's for sure. But Newcastle have one of the lowest levels of, for a club of their size, one of the lowest levels of match day income around, despite having 52,000. So their match day revenue for 2023, which is the last financial year that we know about, was only £38 million. And when you compare that match day to clubs like, you know, particularly the London clubs, you know, is miles behind. So that's really their key challenge. But the thing is, it's not just about seats. So 37.9, which was Newcastle's number for 2023, was actually already a very major increase on 2022. And 2022 in itself had been a record for Newcastle. But the big issue is, if you were to compare, just taking a snapshot, they're half of City, and they're a quarter almost of United on match day. So I think it's true to say they could double match day revenue. I don't believe that they're going to be able to double the whole revenue by the stadium. The whole revenue, let's say this year, the season just gone, was, let's say, about 300 million. So they're not going to add 300 million from the new stadium. If you think about what an additional, even if it was another 30,000 seats, and even if they could charge an average of, let's say, £50, you can, you know, that's only £1.5 million per game. So, you know, even on 20 games, you're not going to get to anywhere near 300 million. So I think, you know, people talk about this stuff. They exaggerate the value of additional seats and additional stadium, and they also discount the very real issue when you're building a new stadium in the way that's been described, of the cost of building the stadium. And I did see this week that some of the discussion has been about a $4 billion build cost for a new stadium for Newcastle, which is an extraordinary amount of money. Now, from a PSR perspective, it can be excluded from the calculation because it's seen as good spending, but it's still, you would think, even for Saudi Arabia and PIF, you would think that they would want to see it financially make sense. And it is quite hard to see how you can spend $4 billion on a new stadium and get a return for it in Newcastle. And a lot of that is just because of the number of fans that will be able to afford the more expensive tickets. You know, you can make, clearly you make revenue from a 20, 30, 40 pound ticket, but the real cream is what you're able to charge in central London in particular. I mean, we spoke previously about some of the tickets at Fulham, where they're charging £150 per seat. And those are standard seats, but you just can't do that in Newcastle. You just will not have the number of people necessary to be spending £150 per seat per game.